Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a three-part recommendation thing here. So, for those that are waiting for a Final Fantasy Tactics remake news binge and whatever else, we're still waiting on getting more details, obviously, but until then, I wanted to throw out three recommendations for folks that are waiting that wanted something similar, but maybe didn't necessarily know where to start. Okay, so again, gonna have three recommendations out here today. All of them as long as you're buying them at the right time, are going to be $25 or less, and all of them are going to be absolute bangers depending on which aspect of FFT you are looking for. So FFT was a combination of a lot of different mechanics and a lot of different specific kind of things there. But I will say it was not lightning in a bottle. It wasn't the only time that those things were done, and it definitely wasn't the only time that they were done well. So to that end, again, we're going to cover three different games here. So the first one here is going to be the one that's going to give you the closest thing in terms of the story. Now, in my personal opinion, the story in Tactics Ogre is better. You basically have the FFT story, and then you have more stuff on top of it. But again, we'll elaborate on that in just a moment. So, we'll also be covering two games that handled the kind of overall game flow, as well as the class building exceptionally well. Okay, now that you've possibly been insulted by the fact that I said something had a better story than FFT, allow me to elaborate. So, before FFT, Matsuno made a little game called Tactics Ogre. I assume most FFT fans have probably heard of it, but in case you haven't, it looked a little bit like this, where, you know, it looked very similar to FFT in terms of its presentation. They both had this isometric chessboard situation going on. They both put a big emphasis on weather and punchiness and things like that. But here's the thing. When it originally came out, what Tactics Ogre was trying to be was a political thriller, wherein the mechanics of the SNES version were pretty darn basic. Like, most of your class growths were literally just the stats that they got. You had a very small selection of skills. You had a lot of your equipment just basically did the same thing. The armor was barely functional. It was a very ambitious game, but its main claim to fame was that, unlike FFT, it actually has an adaptable story. So, now, when I'm saying unlike FFT, I mean that one of the routes of the game was effectively where FFT's story and archetypes and everything else came from. The original, for example, Thunder God Sid was Lancelot Hamilton. The original Delita was Vice. The original Alamo was Cashroy here. They all have different different vibes to them, but you can tell where a lot of stuff came from. In fact, Agrius was originally one of the characters that was cut from Tactics Ogre, who actually came back as Ravnus in the PSP version for Tactics Ogre there. So what's going on here? Well, we're going to have a very similar thing as far as the story goes. We're talking a kind of medieval, low fantasy setting where there's all this mystical stuff going on in the background, but it's basically day-to-day. That people, for the most part, are concerned about the fact that they are starving, and concerned about their politics, and making sure that their neighbors are a bit more dead than they currently are because they were born wrong. And that's just more or less where our setting goes. Where we had more classism and things like that in Final Fantasy Tactics. In Tactics Ogre, we generally see a lot more kind of overall factionalism, though you do see a lot of exploitation of the class system here as well. But here's the thing. In FFT's case, you were playing as the objective good guy. Ramza could basically do no wrong throughout the entire story. And to some folks, that was a good thing. To some folks, it was a bit frustrating. And that is what Tactics Ogre's situation, in many ways, is a total opposite of. Where Denim, in this particular case, is just kind of going with the tide. Depending on what way you decide to play through the game, you can wind up being anywhere from, a despot that gets himself shot in the ending, to the best ruler the place could ever ask for, to literally just a guy that ends up getting everybody to get along, and just up and leaves, puts somebody else in charge and whatnot. There's a lot of different ways that everything can play out. In fact, the overall story and ending structure is closer to something like a Fallout, being a collection of a lot of different pieces that can play out differently depending on who lived or died or whatever else. Because, unlike FFT, when it comes to your story characters, people can just join you and die. People can die in whatever battles they happen to wind up in. You may just never encounter several of the named characters. There's a lot of ways that it can play out, and that's what makes it really, really replayable. that every time you play through, even if you think you made the same decisions, there's a non-zero chance that you might have done some stuff differently that results in a totally different outcome, where technically speaking, there's only a handful of endings. However, every one of those endings will have a ton of different variations depending on the stuff that you've done. If, for example, you're ever one of those folks that was playing FFT, you wanted a similar game and somebody came along and tried to recommend Triangle Strategy, you tried it, and you're like, oh my god, they do not shut up, they have not said anything in these last 3 pages of dialogue, then this is going to be the game to completely flip that script for you. Again, just like FFT, Matsuno is a hell of a writer, so you've got a lot of cases where they're going to be able to get a lot of information across in the subtle kind of context cues and a lot of very short dialogue that manages to just get everything that you need across over who everybody is, what they're doing there, what their intentions are. You know, they're going to have a lot of kind of a thick atmosphere for a lot of the dialogue scenes, and for this one, they actually voiced out all of the dialogue. I'm not going to go into any cutscenes here right now for the purpose of not spoiling stuff, but again, it is a really interesting setting here. So if you were looking for a story that was as well written as FFT, and in my personal opinion, you know, better in a lot of ways, Tactics Ogre is where you want to look. Now, there will be folks that will try to tell you to play one version or another. Look, here's the thing. For the vast majority of people, solid 90% or so, Tactics Ogre Reborn. It's going to be the one that generally made the experience the smoothest by a pretty darn wide margin. And I want to take a quick second to explain why, because there's always going to be those actually guys that end up showing up in the comments. Alright, SNES version. Barely functional mechanically, they were only going for the story stuff. PSP version tried way too hard mechanically, to the point that it got overly complicated, and we had a lot of things that ended up kind of falling on their face. Like you might have noticed those cards floating around on the field during the fights there. Those are actually a way to sort of boil down a mechanic that went too far in the PSP version, wherein we had way too many passives that were flying around, to the point where, like, imagine in FFT if you could stack physical up 4 times on one guy, so you had to go stack defense up 4 times on somebody to counteract it. Yeah, it got goofy pretty darn quick. But the thing was that, yeah, it had a lot of mechanical meat in there. Like, the actual system and whatever else is the same in Tactics Ogre Reborn. They just utilized what's there in a far more elegant way. So we're talking about a game where everything is part of the simulation, from the ground people are standing on, to the loyalty of each individual unit, to the character's religion represented by their elements. There's a lot of things that end up playing a part in this game here, and again, it's one of those things that make it endlessly replayable because you're always seeing new interactions from these mechanics. And for those that are not, you know, that like to stick around for the story but may not necessarily be as good on the actual strategic end, the AI is generally competent enough to do the job to help you out in cases like this. Now, I will say that is going to be one of those things that's going to be a little confusing for some because we don't have as many commands for the AI as were in FFT, and simply put, those kinds of things would not necessarily work on the scale of this game, because you do have some cases where it's like 24v24 battles and such. You can have characters recruited back and forth. In fact, actually, for those that loved using mediators in FFT, you can use a recruit on a huge number of classes to recruit everything from people to lizards to dragons to whatever else, and it's potentially one of the most overpowered abilities in the game on anybody that can use it. Anyway, so yeah, just remember that this is not a story about you being the good guy that manages to solve all the war's problems. You are a leader of, well, a fraction of another fraction that's just trying to get your people to survive to the end of the war with as much humanity as you can save along the way. Like PTSD and the loss of humanity and the tragedy of war is what this one's about, more so than trying to save a family name or anything along those lines. You do see a lot of similar characters, but you will notice that the overall themes are a bit more different here. It's not about the noble houses as much as it is about the everyday people and the soldiers, and how they sort of perceive this war that's well out of their scope. So anyway, yeah, so don't be surprised when your basic generics can take on your named characters. That is, you know, just kind of part and parcel with this whole thing. Okay. So I think I mentioned already that certain characters were more or less prototyped here in the first place. I probably did. I don't know. So that will be that. This will be the closest one as far as FFT goes. Now, I wanted to throw out two more recommendations for folks that really liked specifically the team building or the game flow of FFT, because there's two games that I really love from the indie scene that I think will scratch that. Okay, actually, continuing on with Tactics Ogre here real quick, I should probably mention that for those folks that looked at Tactics Ogre Reborn and wanted to have a bit more in the team building aspect before we move on to the indies here, I should probably also point out that there is just incredibly huge overhaul mod that is kind of considered the other definitive version of Tactics Ogre by the community there, which is a thing by the name of Tactics Ogre One Vision. And for those that are unfamiliar with the joke there, basically all of this particular series, for the most part, the majority of them were named after obscure Queen songs, and in this case it was named after One Vision, being a combination of a lot of ideas from a lot of Matsuno games and such. So, for example, we actually have a lot of FFT-like ideas in this one, things like the armor being a health booster and stuff like that. So, I just want to point out that for folks that wanted a bit more of both worlds, One Vision might be exactly what you're looking for. Now, this is generally why I say Reborn is like for 90% of people, and then the other 10% is going to appreciate the insane mechanical depth of Tactics Ogre One Vision. Just know that there is a pretty realistic possibility that you may find yourself getting lost doing team builds. That's okay, it happens to all of us at some point. Just, again, remember that this isn't exactly the same system, and there's going to be some things that are similar, some things that aren't, and there's going to be a lot more kind of direct FFT ties in this particular version. Like, for example, if we look at somebody that's a Dragoon, let's say, we have, instead of them going and jumping up an infinite amount of tiles, they would, for example, be able to use this move to partway through their action, just move one tile regardless of elevation and things like that. So just so you know, there is going to be a lot more kind of inputs and actions and whatever else for a unit to take at any given time, but you'll notice a lot of familiar elements that end up being added to the Tactics Ogre formula from things like Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story and the original classic versions of both those games. So just so you know, that is a thing. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue on. Alrighty, people, let's go ahead and talk about the next one on the list, and that is going to be Felseal Arbiter's Mark. So, right off the bat, I know the visuals will be kind of jarring to some that haven't seen it before, so allow me to explain and sell you on this real quick. Because yes, it is all kind of a hand-drawn aesthetic and stuff like that, and you can make your characters look goofy as hell, or as serious as you'd like. Personally, I went for the utterly goofy approach, but I want to say that Felseal is effectively, it's team building porn. That's that's what we're looking at here. The story does its job, but primarily it's there to justify going to different places to fight and build up your units. And this is the closest that we've seen to an expansion on the Final Fantasy Tactics team building formula. The folks that made this, as I understand, for the most part, a couple that was into game development, basically went and wanted to make, FFT, but you're mostly focusing on your character builds. And so this is what we wound up with, where you can build just about any character that you like, and you're more or less rolling around as a traveling police department, trying to police the supernatural. So everyone that you hire is just sort of whoever you want them to be. You do have some named characters, like this is apparently from another game that they made. You've got a few folks that are actual, like, in-game people, like this guy's on the box art, and you can tell by the fact that I can't even find them that there's going to be quite a few characters you can put together here. But generally speaking, the idea behind this game is that it's all about the team builds. It's all about the funky characters that you can go and put together. I should also point out, as you might have noticed, the PC version allows you to insert your own portraits for stuff, in case you wanted to do something stupid like making a character off of the Stealth C from FTL. So here's how this works. Its equipment system is actually closer to something like Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, wherein you're going to have a more freeform kind of selection of hands, as it were. So, for example, we've got our two hands, we've got our head, body, and whatever we'd like to put in between. So, for example, accessory slots, you can equip as many accessories as you'd like, and you can more or less stack these as much as you'd like as well. So this means that there's going to be certain things that give you, let's say, abilities, and you can sort of piecemeal out those abilities depending on how many slots you dedicate to that particular accessory. So, like, you know how we had the chemist just kind of throwing items in FFT? In this particular case, it would be dependent on how many item slots you dedicate to the throwing glove. So in this case, she's able to throw items 2 tiles farther. And additionally, let's say, looking at her usage, we've got her skills here. We've got something like, here, let's see if we can find these real quick. So we've got like patented usage here, where any item that they use will be split into a multi-tile ability. Or, for example, let's say we've got item potency, doubling the potency of items and things like that. Where you can have characters spec'd into the most bizarre, oddly specific things you can think of. Like, again, in her case, her whole thing is that throwing rocks do a set amount of damage. She doubles that damage, turns it into an AoE, and primarily she's laying down traps and using throwing rocks as grenades. So, so again, it's just building weird teams. That is entirely this game's bread and butter, and it is so much fun. So yes, the visuals may seem weird to you at first, but mechanically speaking, if you loved the combat in FFT, you loved the potential of a lot of the systems that were there for Bizarro team comps, then this is going to be your jam. I should also point out that this game plus its DLC is typically going to run you $15 or less, and it's available on any modern system. So either way, really, really highly recommended. So yeah, really solid stuff there. And again, builds get absolutely hilarious. So like you might have noticed earlier, just out of curiosity, there was a stream one day where somebody wanted to see Matsuno made into a character. So obviously, somebody that much of a mad lad had to look like this guy. But again, it all depends on what you want to make. The world is completely your oyster in this situation. And I should also point out that we do have things like away missions and whatnot if you go into town. And the fights themselves do make a point to kind of emphasize the aesthetics of the field and stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and skip through this right now. Like there's a big emphasis put on making the weather effects nice and such. Just like something like Disgaea, you will see people's equipment on them at all times, giving you a better idea of who's what exactly. Let's see. I don't remember who I had on this team, so I'm probably going to completely scuff this, but I want to at least show what it plays like here. But when I said that you could basically spec into just about anything, I should also probably point out that this includes things like, let's say, building up your people to, let's say, do something along the lines of specializing in interacting with the field. So we saw earlier how there was a pretty extensive trap mechanic. At the same time, we have cases where there will be items that show up in the field, and rather than using something like move find item, there would just be chests put in hard to reach locations. And so you'd kind of figure out what combination of items and skills could be used to potentially get there. Or for example, let's say you found yourself in a position that you had things like ladders on the field. You could deploy units that would be able to interact with those ladders for free, which might be exactly the kind of benefit that they're looking for at that time. So, either way, it's just a really fun system to play around with. And if you've noticed at any point that it seems like the mechanics, or sorry, the animations look a little bit rigid, basically the idea behind that is that all of these guys have a ton of interactions, like a freakish amount of interactions. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that reuses animations because, again, small team, small budget, just kind of made as a bit of a passion project, but it has an absolute ton of heart, and apparently we're just fighting the Joker over there. Holy crap, that face. So yeah, you can have a lot of fun with team builds here. You can have a absolute ton of fun with different challenge modes and things. I should probably point out actually real quick. Here, let's go over to the options. When it comes to difficulty, do we have? Will we be able to change stuff here? Okay. This is just going to change some stuff. I should have shown this in the previous menu, but it's worth pointing out that you can create your own challenge modes in this one, wherein let's say you find yourself in a position that you want to have permadeath in there, so you can have a permadeath system. Maybe you just want an injury system. Maybe you want to have no injury system. Maybe you want to control how the AI functions, telling it what exactly it can or can't do. And additionally, I should point out that the item, kind of the way that items are handled in this one, is something that I wish every SRPG would do, because this is the perfect, in my opinion, objectively perfect item system for an SRPG. Because rather than worrying about the logistics of going to the store beforehand to go buy all this stuff all the time, you have a ton of skills that interact with them, and you have a limited pool that both parties are able to access. So essentially, like, you go and you craft upgrades to your overall list as the game progresses with your limited resources, meaning that you're going to have your own kind of a upgrade path as far as items go. But additionally, this means that there's always going to be a limited pool of items that you can't just simply item spam your way to victory. But here's the other cool part, because there's interactions, as I mentioned, with skills and such. So, for example, let's say you run out of Phoenix Ashes and stuff like that to revive your units, and you don't have any other revives available. At that point, you can go send somebody to go steal more from the opposite team. You potentially can just go and steal it from them, or let's say instead you want to have more materials to do that, you actually have the Tactics Ogre version of the Steel skill as well, wherein, let's say, you can put a unit to counter Steel, where they'll take materials from a unit upon getting attacked, or let's say you have. As you saw earlier, some of those debuff items, you can make them splash in an AoE instead. Or you have potentially opposite effects similar to the Viking from FFTA 2, or the Ranger, sorry. Or let's say you've got other cases where you'll find items on the field to replenish, what you had here. It's just really nice to have this system like this. And this also means that, for example, if the enemy is going and using these items, then you can go and steal items from them as well. So this means that you've got a ton of potential for cheese in that regard. It's really, really fun. So I absolutely adore the item system here. The item stock system is perfect in my eyes. And additionally, I should also mention that this applies to the way that teams are handled as well. So when it comes to the teams, they're actually not just simply dead or not dead or whatever else. So we've got a sort of interesting middle ground between the way that FFT handled it and the way that Tactics Advance and Advance 2 handled it, where if a unit is downed, they're taken off the map and essentially put into a sort of a discard pile, as it were. Now, what this translates to is the fact that those units are now available for either party to potentially access. Think like Magic the Gathering rules here. So what ends up happening is that we have a character that, let's say, ends up dying, and the other team has a Necromancer. They can revive the other team's unit as a zombie to their side. Let's say there's certain bosses that can just go and mangle somebody into this beetle creature that they control. And yeah, that's kind of fucked up body horror, but they also will end up coming back later on, so don't worry, it's not permanent. But again, if you want a permadeath system, you can put in a lives mechanic to make your people potentially be unusable. However, they're not permanently deleted in case you ever want them back. They're just put into a disabled state if you end up going down that particular road. And shoot, we didn't end up winning that one on time. Oh well. On top of that, there's also New Game Plus, and again, I should mention, like, fully custom difficulty. So, like, let's say in this particular case, we've got the default injury system, but we also can have permadeath, that if a unit goes and gets knocked out 5 times, they're just permanently dead. Random, how the RNG rolls. You can have it weighed or essentially just working normally. You can adjust the level scaling for things. You can adjust stat scaling. You can add enemies. You can add types of gear. Give enemies early access to gear. Give them different passives and counters. Do they use the drowning mechanic? So there's a mechanic in this game in which you can, for example, teleport a unit into the water to have them drown, or for example, can just go and like let's say have a unit bash somebody into the water and they're way down by their equipment and they drown there. But if the character can swim, they're potentially just fine, and this is really cool. Will enemies use revives? How many items do they have? How much will they use their items? You can customize all this stuff. And I should point out another cool feature of this game that I really, really love is with all of these custom characters. You see how there's that pop bubbling in the background? That's kind of always the little cue for me to remember bringing this up. But when it comes to all of your custom characters, depending on which ones you end up using, they actually will show up in cutscenes, just kind of doing their jobs. So while the other story stuff is going on, you'll see stuff like, for example, I had at one point made myself and my wife in the Switch version, and so we were just having some soup off in the background while we had while Tartaros over here was going and patrolling around the camp, or some of them will be interviewing locals after you end up showing up to a location, and again, there's a lot of fun nods to FFT like stuff. Like for example, the you know how you have the occasional neutral encounter, you have those here too. I don't know if there's any situations in which they offer to join you. There wouldn't really be much of a point, but either way, there are going to be neutral people that just sort of show up to help you. Like it, man, it is so much fun. You remember the Sluice map where you flood out an entire map? You do see that mechanic show up a few times here as well, and there's a lot of really fun field mechanics that I don't have for this save file right now. For things like you've got giant crab monsters or whatever else all over the map in the middle of the fight, or you've got potentially different variations that you can create to areas that you control. So like you might have noticed right here that there's that little bonus thing that pops up. This was one of the DLC things, wherein you can build up a region after you've gone and gotten rid of whatever issues it had, where you can, for example, adjust spawn rates, adjust crit rates, adjust recruitment rates, and things like that. So in this case, I have everybody starting off with renewal, but also having a 7% chance to spawn a guy that's basically a loot goblin, along with a far higher crit rate and as well as easier taming rates for going in and getting more monster units. So you can adjust all of that stuff, and for those that loved away missions, there's a ton of away missions that can be done here as well. There's repeatable away missions to constantly train up your extra characters off in the background while you're doing your thing. Most of them are timed, so you're not simply running around the map in circles. And yeah, there's a huge variety of different locations, a huge variety of different things to see on these maps. You've got bigger battles, like for example, this one over here is going to be one of the bigger fights, where you'll have potentially fights that are on the scale of Tactics Ogre that end up showing up. But for the most part, they're closer to sort of an FFT type of scale and everything. So this game has a ton of heart. Please don't be one of those people that looks at the visuals and decide, no, 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 that's not like my FFT. Come on, you're more grown up than that. I believe in you. This is for those folks that were excited about the mechanics in particular, that love team building, that love making goofy units and whatever else. This is going to 100% be your jam. And I should also point out that while the initial thought may be that there maybe will be basic stuff to this equipment or what have you. It's worth pointing out that there is a absolute ton of different equipment types, categories, whatever else, for every character type that allows you to do a lot of really fun builds. You do have unique weapons that'll pop up in each of those categories, and generally speaking, the balance is loose enough that you can make just about any stupid thing work with some good play. So like, let's say in this particular case, we've got a guy that I believe was a summoner ranger or something like that. And if we wanted to, for example, give him an AoE firing automatic crossbow, that might potentially work well with something like a war mage who can add magic attacks to their attacks. So they're basically firing this crossbow in a shotgun blast and also casting a spell every time they do. Very tactics advance of you. We've got other cases where we're going to have more specific crossbows for things like accuracy or things like getting berserks on hit, or potentially getting through armor or whatnot. Like, there's a ton of different categories. This is every time you select a character, it'll boil it down to what they can equip. Like, this is just part way through as far as how many different accessories you can put on somebody at any given time. It is absolutely wild how many accessories are around at any given time. And this isn't even talking about the fact that as you collect equipment, just like something like the Tactics Advanced games there, you can craft your own to get additional mechanics here or there for different reasons, to unlock stuff early, or maybe to build a custom thing that you couldn't get otherwise. If you wanted something like a dagger that makes you avoid better. So yeah, really, really incredibly fun game. If you're a fan of the FFT team building formula, you owe it to yourself to try this thing. Please do not get stuck on the visuals. They really do grow on you, and the little details that you see on each of the maps in combat, it has more detail to it than may initially seem. Like, it's just fun to see the little like lizards and birds and stuff crawling around the map. It just feels very alive. Anyway, so that being said, let's go. So next up on the list is going to be Kingsvein. So this is okay. This is going to seem like a little bit of an oddball one, and also it's going to be the only one on this list that's not available on everything. This one's PC only, just like all Rad Codex games. But this is going to be like, if you're looking for FFT style team building, but you want to kind of view it from a sort of almost Souls-like lens, you are going to love this. Okay. So effectively, what we're looking at here is a extremely interactable game in which you're basically traveling around trying to get to the bottom of a mystery of sorts here, in which a region stopped responding, and so it's essentially you and your custom team that were sent in here to go figure out what happened. Now, you can explore whatever way you'd like, and in fact, the story can actually. Oh, excuse me. The story can actually play out in different ways, depending on how you interact with the world and the people and whatever else. So, like, I never even realized that you could actually spare many of the characters that I ended up killing off on my first playthrough, until I started seeing the endings that people were posting and whatnot. But the way that this game works is that, again, you come in with your custom team, and you're more or less just exploring to your heart's content. That you just have this open world at your disposal, and at any time you can just go around interacting with just about anything. So, for example, let's say there was an enemy on the other side of this sconce here. We could go ahead and use any kind of interaction to go and knock it over in order to set the area on fire. Or, for example, we'll just go ahead and stab this guy right here, but if we had somebody weak to set fire, that's why I've got him holding a lantern, which also ends up kind of lighting up the area around him. Realistically, we're probably losing this fight here because I was not exactly trying to take it as of yet. This is a new game plus run with a lot of the higher difficulty going on, so that's not necessarily going to help us. But yeah, there's a ton of mechanical kind of depth to every character that you see, and enemy characters will actually use the same type of mechanics that you do. So, like, let's say the types of classes that are available, the types of skills that are available, that's something that you'll see the AI making use of as well. And this wide interactability to the world means that you can have fun effects. Like, let's say you'll have moments where, let's say you use your kind of wrestling, long range wrestling and grappling and whatever else skills to rearrange furniture in the middle of a fight to make barricades, or to lay down traps, or potentially to let's say confuse a unit and send them around in the wrong direction or whatnot. Like, there's a lot of fun to be had here. So every class basically has a handful of abilities, but the ways that you can use those abilities will vary up the gameplay quite a bit there. So let's see, like, technically here we could go ahead and do a little bit of absorbing to go absorb the blood off the ground there, or use some lightning to potentially cause that unit to spark around anytime there was blood on the ground or whatnot. Or in this case, we could fire an airburst to go relocate several units at one time. Yeah, that hurt our guy more than their guy, but hey, just trying to show off interactions here. So everything's an interaction, and that's an absolute ton of fun, including the fact that you see many of these characters are going to be carrying offhand crossbows. They actually have to take the time to reload those every time that they fire. The graphics will seem weird at first. I get it. Again, just like, the indie stuff will typically be like that. But man, the visuals really again tend to really stick over time. And I should also point out that as far as the mechanical depth of this thing, this was their, I want to say, what was it, like third, fourth, something like that, game of this type by the time this one came around. So it feels really polished. So I should say that that one of the cool things about this one, and one of the things that I've been praising it for since the FFT remake was announced, is the fact that if they do bring back the JP system for FFT, remake or whatever they call it, this is the one time that I've seen that it was handled exceptionally well. Wherein you basically have all of your world interaction skills available fairly early into the skill tree for all of your different classes, but you unlock classes in a very similar way to FFT as time goes on. So we'll actually just go ahead and load. Let's go ahead and get our menu up here. Give me my menu, please. We'll go ahead and reload the save there to show you what I mean. So let's say. Do I want one of my later characters? We'll go for one. Let's say we'll go for this one. So we'll go for this one to explain how classes work a little bit. So like every one of your characters will look a little bit like this. That they've got their main class, they've got their secondary class, as you'd kind of expect, and depending on what they are, they're going to have three different categories of skills that are available to them. You've got your main ones, which also can be upgraded, which will be their primary things that they do, like putting down, let's say, an exploding spike trap for this trap specialist here, or throwing down caltrops, or putting down razor wire between two locations to go and cut units within a line, or stuff like that. And then you essentially spend more points to upgrade it if you really like that skill. From there, we've got passives, which you can equip 3 of. So, like, let's say right now, what I've got on this guy is a sort of a Super Mario RPG kind of thing, as far as getting additional damage by hitting right before the hit lands. We've got Impaler here, where hitting enemies with fangs and spikes, aka the traps, are going to increase by half of your physical strength. And then this one over here, which will cause all of these sharpened spikes that I'm using to go inflict additional bleed on enemies and things like that. So he's like full on going just trap mode all the time, right? But at the same time, you've got your passives over here that you have a separate kind of currency for, and this is more or less where your stats come from. So when your units are leveling up, so to speak, they don't really level up in the traditional sense. Instead, they end up getting more points to spend on these. So for example, I put most of his points into evasion and spears, meaning that he's going to dodge pretty darn well. His physical and magical bonuses, just like something like FFT there, are going to be relatively low numbers. Whereas if we go to another character, those might be dramatically higher. Like I've got my Alos and Floros over here. Essentially just remakes from Tactics Ogre characters, which are going to have slightly higher numbers there. And again, you're working with lower numbers and higher modifications, and it's really, really fun in that way. And additionally, you can kind of see their career path over here with these little icons. So, like, the more that they master, the more that they get on that little pile there. Additionally, as far as classes go, there's a ton of them, and they're all very varied. On top of those class variations, there's also quite a few different things that you can do as far as items go, I should point out. So, like, you can modify your equipment with different little additions you can slap on there. I've got a wide variety of different types of weapons that are available to you, and additionally your item slots are just like something like Fail Sealed Air, fairly open. So like, let's say you got your cape slot, body slot, and then the rest is more or less open here. Which allows for a lot of interesting dual-wield builds. So, like, if you liked the classic, like, Tactics Ogre glove and weapon setup, you've got that there. If you like people going and swapping weapons, they can do things like equip bandoliers. Like, for example, this one over here allows them to rearrange their items in the middle of a fight, which means that they can pull stuff out of their pockets. Like, this guy uses this Quake Collar here to hit in an area around him, but can pull out his javelins to be a ranged unit whenever he'd like, or or let's say pull out a beer to go get their mana back and stuff like that, or potentially go and swap out for a second glove to just do more with their skills rather than their weapon. And these different modifications that you can do to your characters and equipment are really, really fun to mess around with. I should point out, you may notice that some characters are missing health, so you don't have permadeath in this one for the most part, but you do have cases where your characters will get injured over time, and you have to make it back to your base camp for them to be fully restored back to normal. And this is mostly because your party is more or less decided at the start of the game. You do have stuff that you can do to swap people around, but yeah, it's like there's going to be a lot of stuff to this. Additionally, it's worth noting that with those interactions, some skills are specifically going to be contextual. So, like, let's say you noticed earlier I had that guy that used a lot of traps, right? And so those traps had a lot of bonuses that caused them to inflict the bleed status effect, which puts blood on the ground. And this guy's got another skill over here that will, for example, like electrocute all enemies that are on blood tiles, and will transform all of that blood into oil. At which point we've got, let's say, some fire nearby. All of that oil catches fire and explodes, which means that this guy can cause massive explosions out of what was previously just a basic sharpened trap and stuff like that. Or let's say in other cases you might have noticed that we can trigger our fights whenever we'd like. So like let's say there's a bunch of enemies in a room and you let's say have a unit with Earthquake, so you just round the corner and just hit everybody with an Earthquake before the fight even starts. There's a lot of very kind of ARPG, or not ARPG, but IRPG kind of vibes to it in that way. So that feels incredible. And the maps are very, very well designed. I've oftentimes said that this feels very similar to an Ultima or a Golden Sun in terms of its design, and it's, man, it is so much fun. So this is easily one of the best indies I've ever played, and I wish this did come out on more stuff, just for the purpose of being able to support it more. Like I've gone and been picking up the rest of the library from this dev, because they are excellent at what they do. So yeah, incredible game, and yeah, just an absolute ton of fun. So would really recommend checking that out whenever you have a opportunity. There isn't a whole ton of story. This one's not really meant about its story. It's more meant about the world interactions and whatnot. By the way, check out this coolness, so that we can just go ahead and like just launch this trap into everybody over there, launch one guy off a cliff. Like, dude, I love it. It's so good. Anyway, now like use our bill hook over here to go pull this guy closer. Use that guy's ability to summon stuff to go bring in more allies. Go ahead and electrocute that guy, as well as electrocute those tiles that he was standing on to hit a huge chunk of the map. I mean, like, dude, there's just always stuff happening. It's great. It seems chaotic at first, but once you get used to it, like, it's very unique. So yeah, that'll be about that for these recommendations for now. I just really wanted to kind of show this off. If you're wondering, by the way, are there going to be timed casting abilities? Yes, there are timed casting abilities. So you've got that goodness there as well, which means that there are going to be skills that specifically improve with casting time. There are fun interactions that you can do with that as well. You can basically use casting spells just like you could in FFT to potentially set up a trap in which like you saw there nobody was willing to approach because of that earthquake that I had set up, which allowed us to have a bit more time to go potentially deal with this guy up here. Let's see, can we... I might be able to whiplash that guy, actually. I'm gonna at least try. But yeah, really incredibly good game. Yeah, we can go ahead and pull him off the cliff. Let's go ahead and probably just Thunderbolt him, maybe. And that seems like it's going to be a terrible idea, which is exactly why I want to do it. Anyway, so yeah, that'll be about that. So remember, original, if you really wanted those story interactions and stuff like that, remember Tactics Ogre. If you wanted a mix between Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics, you've got Tactics Ogre One Vision. If you really love the team building in Tactics Ogre and want or in Final Fantasy Tactics, but you really wanted to have just a bigger focus on team building more so than anything else, then we can go ahead and recommend Failseal Arbiter's Mark. And if you wanted to experience if FFT was an open world kind of Dark Souls thing, then you've got Kingsvein over here. And if you ever wanted to then take that a little bit further and think, what if Kingsvein was on ships and you could have your own, little armada traveling around and you could equip cannons on your ships and go fight sea monsters and stuff, then you've also got Horizon's Gate. Did I mention that this dev really loves these formulas? Because yeah, Horizon's Gate is also incredible. I personally really love this one. The most of the Rad Codex games, because the music absolutely slaps, the setting is really cool. You're basically playing as claymation people, which is hilarious to me. But yeah, you do what you prefer. So yeah, that'll be about that. I gotta get going. That's all I had time for here today. And yeah, thank you all for stopping by. Give these games a bit of love, and I'll see you next time.